you've got big dreams and bad genes, you are in the right place. These shirts and Bromley merchandise available at barbellapparel.com. In 2012, the world of orthopedic surgery would receive a roundhouse kick to the neck.
I discovered something about the shoulder that no previous surgeon or investigator had published or discussed, but I found out that one simple exercise cures over 90% of shoulder pain problems.
Dr. John M. Kirsch would stand in front of an international committee of upper extremity specialists and present the findings from his study that contained 92 participants, all of whom had one shared trait: trash fucking shoulders. In the group were 70 cases of subacromial impingement syndrome, 16 confirmed cases of rotator cuff tears, and several cases that were deemed so severe that surgery was the only likely option. Now, one particular participant stood out, a 70-year-old woman whose shoulders had been ravaged by osteoarthritis. Her case was deemed so hopeless by modern medicine that her shoulder replacement surgery had already been scheduled. This woman, along with the other 91 participants, would go through a very complex, very exotic, cutting-edge protocol that would defy all of modern medicine. In a year, this woman was back to day-to-day tasks pain-free.
In 1 year, she was cross-country skiing. She did not have surgery. She had no more pain.
But her story was not unique. She was one of 90 participants who would restore daily function, improve symptoms, and put off future surgeries.
92 patients that I followed who, after doing the exercise for a period of time, cured themselves.
Now, what was this cutting-edge protocol that would overturn the medical industry and throw dirt in the eyes of orthopedic surgeons?
But the most important exercise that I discovered is hanging.
Hanging. It's literally just hanging from a bar. That's right. Out of the 92 participants, 90 would return to comfortable activities of daily living, not with pills, acupuncture, yoga, or even surgery, but just by accumulating time on a damn pull-up bar for several minutes a day. Now, hanging does get touted as a sort of cure-all by modern functional movement specialists. And I want to talk a bit about where it goes too far, but I'm not going to bury the lead here. If it's not as good as they claim that it is, it's pretty damn close. The shoulder is a complicated joint. It does a big job, and the experience of the average everyday non-lifting muggle who is turtled over their screen for many hours out of the day is going to be inevitable shoulder complications. People are going to get strains and tears and phantom pains that they can't seem to trace to a singular cause. And this group of people need an easily accessible protocol that just kills a lot of birds with one stone. Now, if you're on the other end of the spectrum and you're a lifter who's chasing bone-breaking benches or deltoids that look like they're made out of stacked deli meat, likelihood of shoulder problems increases exponentially, and there are greater stakes when something does go wrong. And lifting should be something that improves your manhoodliness. It shouldn't leave you hunched and withered, deteriorated like an arthritic gypsy. Let's talk about some of the frustrations that you might have as a lifter that hanging might actually help with. You have shoulder pain, which we've covered. When these problems come for you, you won't be able to press your way out of a paper bag, and that means no gains until you get it straightened out. Then there's mobility issues. It's bad enough that 95% of us stay hunched over a screen sitting at a desk, and that leaves us frozen in this posture that's reminiscent of Todd from the Wedding Crashers. And these posture and mobility issues might be something that leads to more pain downstream, but I'm more concerned about important things like whether or not bad mobility will F up your lifts. And the answer is yes, having tight lats, pecs, biceps will absolutely cause problems with your lifting. And then there's grip strength. Everybody talks about taking their hands and turning them into an organic model of the jaws of life, but nobody is really clocking the hours needed to do it. Instead, people are trying to take shortcuts like not wearing straps while they lift. And then you have a sea of newbies who are doing deadlifts double overhand with no chalk. That is certainly stupid, but you don't need to clock 10 hours a day in order to get a really impressive grip. Just regular ass hanging can do absolute wonders. Now, we could be here all day with the benefits of hanging, but I'll just add that it decompresses your spine, it rounds out muscular development, it increases strength in areas that tend to be kind of weak and neglected, and it's a good transition period for getting accustomed to things like pull-ups or leg raises or toes to bars, or things that people that aren't accustomed to handling their body weight might struggle with out of the gate. And that's great for them, but if you're an overweight veteran lifter who's riddled with scar tissue and has an acute allergy to body weight movements, well, it can really overhaul specific problems that you're really unlikely to address. So let's get into the why and how of hanging. Anything with pain in it is going to be controversial, and I have to talk about some of the nuance because Kirsch and his study are cited so often in videos about hanging. So I want to make sure we're not just repeating the same information uncritically. And I want to avoid any excess bleeding of the brain caused by aneurysms from movement optimists who are going to tell you that Kirsch is a fear-mongering charlatan who uses outdated models, but on the other hand tells you to do exactly what he recommends. So the basic model for impingement is that the subacromial space is going to determine whether or not the tissues that run under it are going to get squeezed, compress, experience extra friction. So the idea is not having a lot of room there is more likely to cause wear, cause rotator cuff tears, cause pain, and make certain movements undoable. If that's the case, then surgery that does clear out that space and immediately create more room should be a universal success, right? Well, no, not even kind of. Studies show that it's not better than placebo.
The British Medical Journal created a clinical practice guideline in 2019 that made a strong recommendation against surgery. The panel concluded that almost all informed patients would choose to avoid surgery because there is no benefit, but there are harms and it is burdensome.
So the first thing to know about Dr. Kirsch is that he does push back against the current model of using surgeries to fix just about everything.
Studies have shown that the overwhelming majority of these surgeries are unnecessary because the problem, subacromial impingement, is usually satisfactorily healed with nothing more than exercise.
So here he's a voice for suck it up, buttercup. You gotta put in some work if you want to get better, and nobody else is coming to save you or give you a shortcut. And from that end, it seems that he's dead on. But Kirsch does also simultaneously abide by and prop up the model for impingement syndrome as a reason for recommending hanging in the first place. His entire breakthrough that he kind of jerks himself off over is that hanging pushes up against the acromion and forces it to remodel itself slowly over time, which creates a bunch of extra space. His entire hypothesis is that brachiation, which is annoying nerd speak for swinging with your arms, is something that our ancestors did. It's what our shoulder is uniquely modeled to do in a way that other species is not, and that by removing that over time, we've opened up this joint to have a bunch of problems as a byproduct of not creating that stress against the acromion. So over time it falls, you get greater chance of impingement, and now you have a bunch of surgeons who are just slice happy and want to cut you open because that's how they get paid.
Hello and welcome to Mixed Surgeons. May I take your order?
Now right off the bat, there seems to be a few problems with that. Like, how long does it take the bone to remodel itself? It seems like it would take a while, even for a small bone. And why does hanging and other shoulder distraction movements seem to provide immediate benefit? And then there's all the data that pushes back against the idea of impingement, like subacromial spaces not correlating with symptoms.
A systematic review by Park et al. In 2020 found no relationship between the acromiohumeral distance and pain in adults with shoulder pain.
There are different shapes of arches that exist in the population, and the one with the most space is actually extremely rare.
Well, in a 2010 study, they found that in the asymptomatic population, 81.3% had type 2 acromions and 14.1% had type 3 acromion. 2002 study, they saw there was no link between the shape of your acromion and having rotator cuff tear.
So if the model of impingement is wrong, does that mean hanging as a recommendation is also misguided? No, hanging is widely recognized as a great tool to combat symptoms and help start the path of recovery. It improves strength and flexibility, it improves symptoms. It just means that the specific mechanism that makes this productive is in fact in doubt. So is the real mechanism muscular, neurological? Is it psychological? We don't really know, and I would argue it doesn't matter. Anytime you have something with pain in the title, there's a fog of subjectivity that's really going to screw any investigation you try to do. Experts are going to argue over whether or not you should continue to add stress to strengthen the area or whether you should go through a cool-off period. Should you modify the work based on the pain that you're experiencing, or should you avoid catastrophizing and jump into the thing that you're scared of? Should we assume that something is mechanistically wrong? Or should we really focus on the fact that psychology and other factors play a much bigger role than we might think? The truth is everybody's working with the same data and they're just really taking their liberties, trying to make broad, all-encompassing statements for the entire population, when in fact, every single individual person is going to have a uniquely different circumstance that we can't get to the bottom of. And as far as broad, all-encompassing statements for a general population dealing with a bunch of different individual shit goes, hanging as a means of treating pain seems to be a pretty good one. Even for those that don't have quote-unquote impingement, but actual verified rotator cuff tears, hanging is still viable. You can do it without causing further issues. And even though it doesn't specifically address the tear, it does get the individual to go through a full range of motion with their shoulder under a load in a way that they probably wouldn't do otherwise. This means you get just a big head start on rehab and you're not walking around with your arm tucked to your side like a wounded goddamn bird. Typically when you're hurt, the worst thing you can do is nothing, and when you are really afraid of the pain, you end up avoiding simple shit like opening doors or putting on a jacket. You need an in, you need some activity that you can do that isn't going to make you seize up in pain, and hanging can be a really good intermediate step for that. So aside from the clusterfuck of uncertainty that comes when talking about injury and pain and specifically recommending this as a rehabilitative movement, we could talk about general stuff that's good for everybody. Mobility is a big one. That's probably one of the best use cases for hanging, especially for lifters who do tend to get bound up and tight, and that tends to have other problems downstream. Now, if you heard me talk about mobility and getting so muscular that you physically can't get in certain positions and you thought, what's that like? I wish I had that problem. Pull up a seat. I'm here to tell you about Base Strength AI. See, getting big and strong is a very mechanical process. Should be easy. It should involve very rote, cold, logical decision making, but we like to get in our feels. We like to overcomplicate the shit out of things, and more often than not, we end up making really bad decisions. So to take away all of the anxiety, all of the unnecessary opportunities to make bad decisions, we made an app to solve that specific problem. This takes all the guesswork out of getting strong. It takes my templates, which many of you have had just glowing success with over the years by itself, and it personalizes to you. It takes information that you put in real time, telling you right now in the workout, not a week later when your online coach decides to get back to you along with his other 130 clients. It says, hey, this was an RPE 9.5. It should have been a 5. Lighten the weight, get your shit together, let's go. It adjusts the volume, it adjusts the exercise, it adjusts the entire structure based on your history and your preferences. It does things not even an online coach can do, and it is 1/10 of the cost. So what are you doing? Take that Christmas money you just got from grandma and go to basestrength.com. Make 2025 the year that you let yourself get strong. Make it easy. Go to basestrength.com. Link is below. You might intuit that getting bound over time is a one-way ticket to having pain issues downstream. I'm not even going to get into that argument. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I can tell you it's a shitty way to lift weights. When you have big muscles around a joint that are physically incapable of moving the way you want them, you might be aiming to move into the most developmentally effective position or the most efficient position for lifting the most amount of weight. But the tightness of the muscles are going to put you into another position, and it's likely not going to be the one that you want to be in. Like when you want to overhead press, getting the bar back over your head requires the lats having a certain amount of pliability, and if they don't have that, you're going to end up doing that push out in front bullshit that is really unsustainable with any amount of weight that stands a chance of winning a contest or of developing a muscle. Now, maybe you want a nice front rack position for doing things like front squats or setting up for a big overhead press. I hope your external rotation is excellent, and again, I hope your lats are loose enough to accommodate that in the first place. And if you really want to chuckle, find a heavyweight bench specialist who spent years getting tension in their pecs, so it's like a built-in bench shirt underneath their skin, and watch them try to get their hands in position on a straight bar to do a set of squats. If I asked for good stretches to solve these issues, many of the people watching would have to consult Google Assistant in order to come up with it, and most of you wouldn't incorporate those stretches anyways. But if I told you that you could fix it through hanging, and you could also solve like 10 other problems, and that you could wedge it in the middle of your workout without having to allocate extra time at the gym, well, eventually you're going to get more flexible. Your biceps, pecs, and lats will open up as an afterthought. This is going to improve your positioning in lifting across the board. Now let's talk about brachiation, which is the buzzword that gets thrown into all of these videos. It's basically what you assign to the type of movement that certain types of primates do as they swing from tree to tree, or as your child does on the monkey bars. It's just moving through space using your arms instead of your legs. I don't want to romanticize it because it usually appeals to the type of trend where we look at what our ancestors did and assign some special value to it. We don't swing from trees to get around, and gibbons don't use goddamn cell phones. I don't even think it's completely accurate to talk about the human body in terms of what it was meant to do. But we can look at it through what it can do, and our shoulders certainly can do this. And I do think it's accurate enough to say that our shoulders are probably more closely built for something like swinging from branches then they're built to do something like a bench press 3 days per week. Hanging is antagonistic to heavy pressing. For performance, there's a minimum amount of symmetry you need. That means that the pecs and delts are balanced by the lats and the rhomboids. It means that pushing is countered with ample amounts of pulling. It means that compression is countered with decompression. And if you assume, as many people do, that the presence of symptoms is some mix of poor load management with the failure to incorporate a necessary amount of symmetry in your training, even if it's not true in specific situations, it at least gives you a pretty good starting point. And the line of benefits guarantees you're not going to be worse off than when you started. Now, swinging with the arms is much different. It's much more dynamic activity than just hanging. So we can look at hanging as kind of the simplified starting point. That's where most of the benefits are going to be derived. The grip strength, the extra mobility throughout the muscles around the shoulder joint, the decompression of the spine, and maybe, just maybe, the restructuring of the shoulder in a way that makes it more durable over time. If we want to go all the way there and say this forgotten movement is really the source of all of our woes, and it makes sense to take brachiation all the way to its ultimate conclusion and work up to the point where we're actually swinging from bars. So the logical steps to that would be to start with something like passive hanging, but then steadily work up to do active hanging. That's going to be where, instead of just focusing on the stretch, letting the muscles relax and lengthen as much as they can, we're actually using the musculature to elevate ourselves slightly up towards the bar and get that scapular movement that is also used in a whole bunch of other movements we do that can get really kind of glued down and dysfunctional when we ignore it. Note that we do that when we're setting up for a deadlift, pulling the shoulder blades down into the pocket. We also do that when we're setting up for a big bench. And when we are pressing overhead, we also want good active movement through the scapula, and this type of active hang, it's a really good way to condition that. Also, if you're a lifter or athlete who is struggling with like a labrum tear, rotator cuff issues, pain in your shoulders, getting through your workout and continuing to grow is only going to happen if you can create a bunch of excess stability in the joint. And any video that you look into that's going to help you do that, it's going to recommend you start by focusing on all the little muscles around that joint, doing things like Y raises and face pulls and external rotations, because all of those muscles are going to compensate. Getting those stronger and active and online can make up for the lack of stability you have from some other issue. Active hangs are a big piece of that puzzle. Now let's get to how to hang. Some of you might think this section is just filler and you're happy to just go hang from a bar and figure it out and you guys are probably going to be okay. But some people, they want to read the fine print and make sure that they're not leaving any stone unturned. So we're going to go line by line, not just how to start if you have trouble with your body weight, but we're going to talk about some variations, some ways you can progress, what your positioning should be like, and what if you have other goals? What if you want to focus on your grip? What if you want to focus on your shoulder? What type of changes should you make? So let's get into it. Starting out with hands and grip. Now, everybody should strive to be able to hang for an extended period of time with their body weight. Like I said, the grip benefits are huge and that will carry over to all kinds of things, but you should not let perfect be the enemy of good. If you're a person who has a lot to gain from getting that shoulder joint in that lengthened position and accruing time from a bar, but you have a difficult time holding onto the bar for time, do not settle for short little intermittent hangs of only a few seconds because your grip is a limiting factor. If your grip strength and your body weight are just too far apart, like you can't hang onto a bar for 10 seconds, or maybe you're just solely concerned with what's going on in the shoulder, you don't really care about your grip at all, use straps. There's nothing wrong with that. Using straps takes your grip out of the equation and it will make it so that you can absolutely maximize what is going on in the shoulder joint. No one is grading you on this. There's no standards anybody's keeping track of. It's solely based on what you want to get out of it. Now, if you are going to forego straps and use your grip, congratulations. Just make sure your hands are dry, you're chalked up. Don't be the guy who's fighting sweaty palms because you think chalk is cheating or something. Now, next up is position, and I think this has a little more to offer than people might intuit at the start. Ideally, you want your body fully elongated, feet hanging straight down, but if you don't have a bar that's that high, that's perfectly fine. You're gonna hang with your knees bent just to get the weight of your feet off the ground. Now, the reason you'd want your legs to hang straight down is because gravity is gonna realign the positioning of your spine in a way that we kind of strive for in a lot of movements. For instance, if your ribs are kept down, that's going to flatten out your diaphragm and your pelvic floor is going to hang directly beneath it. It's when gravity takes over, you're standing on your own 2 feet, that the movement dysfunction takes over and it takes you out of position. So just like when I set people up for 90-90 breathing, thinking about the ribs down, getting the diaphragm directly over the pelvic floor, this is a great way to kind of reinforce that position, and you're going to feel what parts of your body are tight that is putting you back in that position when you're back on the ground. But again, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. If you have a low bar, hang from the low bar. I would also say head position probably doesn't matter. Just don't choke yourself out with your massive delt by shoving your head forward and having that pressure against your carotid artery. Now, some cues to focus on, starting with a passive stretch. We're focusing on letting the muscles hang, lengthening as much as possible, so I work into that. Once I get my grip set and I start the hang, as time goes on in the first 10 or 20 seconds of the stretch, I like to actively push my body down. So I'll physically be pushing up into the bar to try to lock my elbows. They have trouble locking out anyway, so there's a good opportunity to stretch those biceps that are a bit too tight. And I try to get my shoulder to elevate as much as possible to get as much space in there. Now, it's also going to be uncomfortable in the beginning, but working in this position is going to build a lot of strength and tolerance to that position. When you get more comfortable here, you can incorporate active cues, that is pulling your scapula down instead of elevating your shoulders. Focus on depressing them under a load. Again, think shoulder blades in the back pocket. It's a really good deadlift and bench press cue. Now, a good one to take that a step further is to work towards alternating hands. You're going to start incorporating one arm at a time. Some of you heavier boys aren't going to get to the point where you're dangling from one arm for 30 seconds at a time, but you can start to do short touches where you are elevating with one arm at a time, almost like you're initiating on the monkey bars. And this is a really good drill to make it a little more difficult. It's also going to make it a little more fun and engaging, pass the time quicker. Because I'm here to tell you, hanging for 110 seconds from a bar in a passive hang, it gets a little monotonous. These challenges actually do kind of make it more enjoyable, and they're going to take you farther. Now, the most important thing here is clocking a lot of time on the bar and often getting to limit, especially if you're working your grip, getting to that point where your fingertips are about to slip off. You don't have to have a set progression to follow. Some people like it, but just doing the thing on a regular basis is going to give you the benefit. In a single day, schedule 2 to 3 max length hangs, and you can do that 3 to 4 days a week or more if you are so inclined. If you are progression oriented, you want to start with time. Think of this as a double progression in lifting, where you start with a set weight, hit a certain rep number, and once you can do that for all your sets, then you add weight and repeat. This is very similar. Whatever weight you're using, whether an assistance method like bands or a pull-up assistance machine, if you're using your body weight, maybe you're a stud, you're strong enough to go with extra weight. Start with that weight, push time over many sessions until you reach a certain threshold. Then you can drop back, add more resistance, and repeat. If you can handle your body weight, I recommend working up to about a minute hang. And when you can do that, it's time to either add weight or use a more challenging variation. Adding weight, you can use a dip belt or you can use your spouse. And if you are chasing weight, I would still tell you to prioritize some type of active hang in the mix. You don't have to do the whole thing in some type of active scheme, but get comfortable while you're hanging, moving your shoulder blades, depressing your shoulder, alternating your hands. Little bits of that activity throughout a longer passive stretch is going to add up, and it's going to make you stronger overall. You can also make it harder by switching the types of bars you use. Many racks nowadays have fat and thin support bars to hang from, which will tax your grip differently and change the duration of the hang time. If you really want to tax your grip, one of my favorite things to do is, instead of using the fixed pull-up bar, which doesn't spin, which lets you use a lot of the friction between your skin and the bar to hang a lot longer, instead use a free rolling bar. What you can do is take a regular barbell, put it at the top of your rack, and now that bar can roll forwards or back. Might even have a subtle bend in it that makes hanging a little more difficult, and you can hang from that. I was getting close to 2 minutes on a fixed pull-up bar. When I went to a free rolling bar, I got right under a minute, and when I went to a axle free rolling in the top of the squat rack, I could barely eke out 30 seconds. Again, you get all the benefits of hanging, but now you're really putting your grip on blast, and this is where you really start to make gains that would otherwise have to involve really focused, targeted grip work done specifically throughout the week. This is where we're killing many birds with one stone. Now, I strongly recommend not getting hung up on performance metrics. When you start to look at all of the different ways you can do it, you get paralyzed, you end up not doing nothing. The important thing is you go get your ass on a pull-up bar, make that just a regular thing you do. One of my favorite hacks to people that like to procrastinate or get paralysis by analysis, just make it your warm-up. It's that thing you do dicking around before you actually get to your workout that's not very difficult. You just say, hey, I'm not going to be able to bench press today unless I get 2 rounds of hanging out first. I can't deadlift today unless I do my hangs in between. Just make it the thing you do first. It's not going to interfere with your workout, and you're still going to be able to accumulate that progress over time. Shoulders are going to feel better. Lats, pecs, biceps are going to be more lengthened. Your lifts are going to go off better. Your spine's going to be decompressed. And you stand the risk of getting a grip that's strong enough so when you go to shake the hand of your girlfriend's father, he might actually think to himself, okay, Mary, I guess I was wrong about you. And if you don't have a girlfriend, what are you doing here? Go out and talk to some people. So in conclusion, hanging's pretty good. It's pretty fun. There's a lot of ways to do it. Super easy to do. Kills a lot of birds with one stone. This isn't like the gimmicky productivity protocols like taking cold showers or putting butter in your coffee. This actually does what it says, and I strongly recommend you guys incorporate it if you have any of the issues I listed out, which all of you probably have at least one. So when your back and shoulder stops hurting and you start getting compliments on your once tiny forearms, I expect a thank you email. Thanks so much for watching, guys. That's all I got for today. Leave your comments, questions in the comment box. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.